For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello, and welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet. I will be your host for this podcast, as in past podcasts. Today we're going to be talking about Revelation chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. If you want to get the nutshell version of this podcast, check out section 44 in my book that is a lot more succinct than what I'm going to be covering today. But we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to jump right into it with an introduction about this verse. Keep in mind that during the last podcast in Revelation 4:6, I talked about how the sea of glass like unto crystal represented celestial paradise in the postmortal spirit world, even though, as I acknowledged, most people within the church today believe that Revelation 4:6 is a vision of the celestialized earth after its resurrection and after the millennium. And I gave about 7 different reasons why I think that that view is not a correct interpretation of Revelation 4:6. And, hopefully I've shown you what is possible, if not convinced you that, in fact, Revelation 4:6 is an image of the postmortal spirit world rather than the celestialized earth. And so if you understand that concept, it's going to make your understanding easier as we kind of continue through this vision that will continue through the end of chapter 4 and into chapter 5 as well. So today we're going to be covering that portion of Revelation 4:6 that describes these 4 beasts in paradise. And that part of this verse says, quote, "And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind." Quote. Now this part of this verse has been interpreted for us by a vision that Joseph Smith had, where he was basically able to have his Q&A session with the Lord. It's the what we can refer to as the frequently asked questions section of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is section 77. And in verse 2 it says, quote, "What are we to understand by the 4 beasts spoken of in the same verse?" Answer: they are figurative expressions used by the revelator John in describing heaven, the paradise of God, the happiness of man, and of beasts, and of creeping things, and of the fowls of the air, that which is spiritual being in the likeness of that which is temporal, and that which is temporal in the likeness of that which is spiritual, the spirit of man in the likeness of his person, as also the spirit of the beast, and every other creature which God has created. So here we have again the reference to paradise of God, which very infrequently is ever described as the celestial kingdom. And so this again, just this verse alone is another confirmation that what we're talking about here is essentially the celestial paradise in the postmortal spirit world. Now the throne of God, of course, that we're talking about in Revelation 4:6 has reference to the throne of God, and his presence exists in the postmortal spirit world. If you want to get more context for that, check out my podcast from April 28th of 24, where I talk about Revelation 4 verses 2 and 3. So just by way of discussion about the throne in a little bit more detail, Elder Hiram Smith suggests that the 4 beasts are possibly supporting the throne. And when he said, quote, "The revelator saw 4 beasts, or rather 4 living creatures, in the midst of the throne and round about it. They were possibly supporting it as the cherubim in Ezekiel 1, verses 4 through 22, close quote. Now, with all deference to Elder Smith, I take a different view, and part of it stems from the fact that the 4 living creatures, or the beasts as we'll talk about, are not in close proximity to the throne. The Joseph Smith translation actually places them outside the sphere of the 24 elders who were seated on 24 thrones in white raiment and wearing crowns. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But the point is that there are certain views about these four beasts, or the living creatures, and their support of the cherubim. But this comes from Ezekiel 1. So we have an allusion here in verses 1 and 4 and 5, which says, quote, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, I was among the captives by the river of Chebar," that's in Babylon, "and the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire, also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of four living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man." Close quote. So what we're talking about with these four beasts comes to us from visions that Ezekiel had, and others as well, but in particular Ezekiel, where he saw four similar living creatures who had these likenesses in those that are described by John here in Revelation 4:6. Now, these four, as I mentioned, are round about the throne. These are those specific words in Revelation 4:6. And in the King James Version, they kind of form the first of concentric circles around the thrones, with the 24 elders being second. And I described these 24 elders, their thrones, white raiment, and crown, in a podcast that I did on Revelation 4:4 on May 4th of 2024. So you can go back and get more detail about those guys in that particular podcast. But what's important is, even though the King James Version tends to identify the four beasts on the inside of the thrones that are for the 24 elders, the Joseph Smith translation of Revelation 4:6 actually reverses the order, and appropriately so. It says, quote, "In the midst of the throne were the 24 elders, and round about the throne were four beasts full of eyes before and behind." Close quote. So the change that's made in this verse is to place the 24 elders, who represent exalted saints, closer to the throne, that are then followed by these four beasts that, as we will learn, represent all creation, including all unexalted creation. And so they have a favored position near the throne, and yet they're still not as close to the throne as exalted persons represented by the 24 elders. And that's entirely accurate and makes complete sense. Now notice that the four beasts don't have thrones, they don't have white raiment, they don't have crowns as described by the 24 elders. And so this all confirms the correct ordering of their proximity to the throne, with those being closest who are exalted, and those further away who are less exalted. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And so some also suggest that the four beasts are in the vision of John merely to kind of serve as guides and to be protectors of the throne. In this sense, they kind of are relying on the imagery from the Ark of the Covenant, where you have these two cherubim who are protecting the mercy seat with these outstretched wings right on the top. You got to go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and look at that vision, because that's a pretty good idea of what the Ark of the Covenant, as best we can describe it, look like. And so you have the outstretched wings protecting the mercy seat. We also have the concept that after Adam and Eve had partaken of the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, the Lord says, "Let cherubim and a flaming sword be placed to guard the way of the tree of life." And so, again, the cherubim kind of come into play as a means of protection. And that's why people suggest that these four beasts, who tend to represent, they have wings, and so they're a lot like cherubim, are protective of the throne that John is seeing in his vision of heaven. But the reality of it is that's not what they're intending to represent here in the book of Revelation, and in particular in verse 6. Now, it's true that the four beasts, at least one of them, has a role in giving some instruction to John during the course of the vision, but I think that tends to be somewhat tangential or collateral to the main message of who these guys are here in Revelation chapter 4. Here they are representing redeemed creation, which we will get into in more detail. So let's talk about these four beasts in a little bit more detail. First of all, the word four beasts is a bit of a misnomer. It would be better to have translated the imagery as living creatures. But how this came about was essentially John Wycliffe, who created the first English translation of the Bible in the late 1300s, and he actually has several versions of English translations in that time frame. He translated the Greek words for living beasts or living creatures, and he called them these four beasts. And so essentially, because of his tradition in his English translation, others just kind of followed suit because it just kind of makes it easy. But I think most biblical commentators will say that those words don't really very well describe what we're looking at. And Joseph Smith said this, quote, "Daniel did not see an actual bear or a lion," speaking here in Daniel chapter 7, "but the images or figures of those beasts. The translation should have been rendered image instead of beast in every instance where beasts are mentioned by the prophets. But John saw the actual beast in heaven, showing to John that beasts did actually exist there and not to represent figures of things on the earth." Close quote. So we're seeing this distinction that Joseph Smith makes about these four beasts being actually present in the vision that John saw, but not beasts in the sense that we think of these wild and vicious beasts that exist on the earth. And so the word beast does not correctly convey the idea of the Greek word zone or zoon, which would be better translated as living things or living creatures. Now, this stands in contrast to the Greek word therion, which is a wild beast. This is the kind of beast that Joseph Smith was referring to in his quotation that I just mentioned above. The same word of a wild beast or therion is later used by John to describe agents of Satan on the earth. And so these beasts, quote unquote, in heaven that John sees are living and intelligent creatures, and later on we're going to see them worshiping God the Father on the throne, and they serve in a very antithetical way as an opposite of the symbolic beasts that represent parts of Satan's kingdom. And as I mentioned, some people call them cherubim, but they really don't serve in that function either. It's important to note that these four beasts are distinguished from the 24 elders and other angels. And so check out my podcast on Revelation 4:4 from May 4th of 2024 that talks about these distinctions that exist between the elders, the beasts, and the angels. But essentially these beasts, although they differ from the 24 angels and other angels, they do engage in activities of worship with the 24 elders. And so if we jump forward in time to John's vision of celestial paradise in Revelation chapter 7, verse 11, we see this description of all of these folks together worshiping, saying, quote, "And all the angels stood round about the throne and about the elders and the four beasts, and fell down before the throne on their faces and worshiped God." Close quote. So essentially, these four beasts or four creatures are real, they are literal, like the 24 elders are literal, but they are also representative symbols. And in this case, the four beasts represent the symbols of all of God's creation. So in Revelation chapter 4, the focus of the vision by John is on the creation by God the Father, whereas in Revelation chapter 5, the vision still is of celestial paradise, but the focus is on the redemption of all those in celestial paradise who are redeemed by Christ. Now, Joseph Smith further described what's going on in connection with these beasts when he said, quote, John saw the actual beast in heaven, showing to John that beasts did actually exist there. John saw curious-looking beasts in heaven. He saw every creature that was in heaven. All the beasts, fowls, and fish in heaven actually there, giving glory to God. I suppose John saw beings there of 1,000 forms that had been saved from 10,000 times 10,000 earths like this, strange beasts of which we have no conception. All might be seen in heaven. The 4 beasts were 4 of the most noble animals that had filled the measure of their creation and had been saved from other worlds because they were perfect. They were like angels in their sphere. Close quote. So that's Joseph Smith's description of this, and he elaborates that scripturally in Doctrine and Covenants, section 77:3, which says, quote, are the 4 beasts limited to individual beasts, or do they represent classes or orders? His answer, they are limited to 4 individual beasts, which are shown to John to represent the glory of the classes of beings in their destined order or sphere of creation, in the enjoyment of their eternal felicity. Close quote. Now, what we're going to be getting into now is a discussion of what these 4 beasts represent. So we know that they are individual beasts, they're actual beasts, but they do represent the glory of classes of beings. And there are differences of opinion as to what classes are being represented. So everybody tends to agree, whether you're within the church or outside the church, everybody agrees that they serve in a representative capacity of these various beings. But then the question becomes, well, what are the 4 things that they are representative of? Now, keep in mind that the other thing that's important to note about what we're told here in verse 3 of section 77 is we're talking about these individual beasts. And if you go back one verse to section 77:2, it's talking about the fact that animals as well as men have spirits that resemble the body. And in that verse 2 that's been previously quoted, it says, quote, that which is spiritual being in the likeness of that which is temporal, and that which is temporal in the likeness of that which is spiritual. The spirit of man in the likeness of his person, as also the spirit of the beast, and every other creature which God has created. Close quote. Now, the reason why I recapture this quote and kind of give it to you again, it sounds like I'm being repetitive, and I am, but I'm doing it for a reason. And the reason is, why is John talking about these beasts, and here Joseph Smith's interpretation of them, of their spirits being in the likeness of their temporal and so on and so forth? And this tends to reaffirm through Joseph Smith's visions in section 77 that John is talking about the postmortal spirit world. If we were talking about the celestial kingdom, there would be no reason in verse 2 of section 77 to be talking about the spirits of things being in the likeness of their physical and the temporal in the likeness of that which is spiritual. That's a commentary that applies very well to the context of the postmortal spirit world, where we're talking about spirits and how their spirits are in the likeness of their physical, because their physical is gone. The physical is in the grave. It's dead. It's decaying. And you have these spirits. And so essentially in 77:2, we're talking about the spirit of man, the spirit of animals and of beasts, and how everything has a spirit that is within them. And the reason we're talking about spirits in the context of 77:2 that then leads to the discussion of the 4 individual beasts in verse 3 is because, guess what? We're in the postmortal spirit world. We're not in the celestial kingdom, because in the celestial kingdom, everyone will have resurrected, perfected physical bodies, and there's not a discussion about spirits in the postmortal spirit world, in the postmortal resurrected earth, right? And so this kind of goes along with these 7 reasons why Revelation 4:6 and the sea of glass is referring to paradise. So check that out from my last podcast on May 11th. So at any rate, if we compare this idea of the spirits that exist within humans and animals, consider also John 4:24, which says, quote, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So here you have this declaration by John that God is a spirit. And it's true, he is a spirit, but he's also on the inside of this glorified physical body post-resurrection. These things kind of tend to get a little confusing. Again, I keep harping on this, but you got to consider the context of what is being said. Okay, so at any rate, coming back to what these 4 beasts represent and the classes of beings that are represented to be in their destined order and sphere of creation. And so these 4 beasts are living creatures that are to be redeemed by the atonement of Jesus Christ. And this is stated in Revelation 5, verses 8 and 9, where it says, quote, and when he, meaning Christ, had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of saints. And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. Close quote. Now, by way of reminder, these verses in Revelation 5 are a description of how Christ is being worshipped as the Redeemer, whereas, as I mentioned in Revelation 4, the vision was focused on the worship of the Father for his creative enterprises. So here in the concept of redemption, we have the 24 elders who fall down and worship the Lamb for their redemption, but they're singing a song that is also related to the redemption of all living things who are redeemed by the atonement of Jesus Christ. And so this includes things like animals, which Joseph Fielding Smith said, quote, animals do have spirits, and that through the redemption made by our Savior, they will come forth in the resurrection to enjoy the blessings of immortal life, close quote. Now, if you go on, we have a similar kind of statement that is also a little bit broader in the quote from Joseph Fielding McConkie, who said, quote, on the matter of the resurrection of animals, Joseph Smith said, any man who would tell you that this could not be would tell you that the revelations are not true. To argue for the existence of life forms that were not subject to Adam's fall is to argue at the same time that they are not redeemed through Christ's atonement. Such an argument places God in the awkward position of creating that which he does not have power to save, close quote. And I think that's a really good statement, his last sentence about God the Father, whatever he creates, there is going to be a power also to atone for them and to redeem them. And so this extends well beyond just humans. It extends, of course, to animals, which has been made express, but it also applies to plants as well as to worlds themselves. All these things have been created by the Father, and if we're saying that the atonement and redemption doesn't apply to humans, animals, plants, and even worlds as these classes of creation, then we're saying essentially that God is not in a position of redeeming or saving the things which he has created. And that's the point that Elder McConkie is making. And it goes to this concept of what are these classes, because all of creation basically consists of 4 classes of creation. They include humans, animals, plants, as well as the mineral kingdom or the worlds themselves, all right, what we would consider the inorganic world. Okay, now these classes exist in 4, and there are 4 beasts that correspond to these 4 classes as well. Now, if you go back to my podcast when I was doing the Come Follow Me podcast number 5, I did a podcast on October 29th of 2023 that deals with numerology, and 4 is one of the numbers that I discuss. It's the world number that represents the whole of creation. The concept is associated with the cardinal points of the compass, representing geographical completeness and wholeness. And so you'll see illustrations of this 4 cropping up all over the place. And for example, in Revelation 6, you've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In Revelation 7, you have the 4 angels on 4 corners of the earth holding back the 4 winds. In Revelation 20, you talk about the 4 quarters of the earth. And apart from the use of this number in the book of Revelation, you have, for example, in Genesis 2, where you have the river that flowed out of Eden dividing into 4 great different rivers in 4 different directions. So 4 comes up a lot, okay, and it's the world number. Okay, let's talk a little bit about these 4 creatures and the description of them in a little bit more detail. Starting first of all with the concept that they are full of eyes before and behind. Looking at the concept of the eye, first of all, that's going to help us appreciate what this imagery is talking about. The eye is thought of as the source of light, enlightenment, and knowledge to the soul. So through the physical eyes, one gains much knowledge of temporal things, and through the spiritual eyes, one sees or understands the things of God. This is what it says in Matthew 6:22 and 23. It says, quote, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" Close quote. So these are some verses that talk about the concept of the eye. Paul similarly spoke in Ephesians 1:18 when he said, "The eyes of your understanding being enlightened." In 2 Nephi 9:44, we have a reference to an all-searching eye. In Jacob 2:10, we have a piercing eye. So the eye, in connection with things of the spirit, and in particularly the eye concept of an all-searching eye that is associated with God and with Jesus Christ, it's an expression of omniscience. In other words, there's no place that God's eye cannot penetrate, and there's nothing that he does not know. Now, we're helped out with the concept of these eyes and wings in Doctrine and Covenants section 77, the FAQ section, as I'm referring to it, in verse 4, where it says, quote, "What are we to understand by the eyes and wings which the beast had?" And the answer is, their eyes are a representation of light and knowledge. That is, they are full of knowledge, and their wings are a representation of power to move, to act, etc. Now, we've already seen that these 4 beasts are actual, but you have to understand that the symbolic description of their attributes are not necessarily literal. Okay, so when it talks about these, they are full of eyes before and behind, this is probably a symbolic description that helps to explain the nature of the light and knowledge that they are full of, and not that they have eyes all over their bodies. And if you compare it to Revelation 4:3, where the presence of God the Father is described as he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and sardine stone. So this was a description of God the Father on the throne, and they're saying, well, he looks like a jasper and a sardine stone. That's not what the Father looks like, okay? And so the Father does literally sit and have his presence in the post-mortal spirit world that we call celestial paradise, but he doesn't, his attributes themselves are not a jasper and sardine stone. In the same sense, we have 4 literal actual beasts that are present in the spirit world, but do they have eyes, literally every part of their body? And the answer, probably not. This is used symbolically to express this concept of light and knowledge that they possess. And the fact that the eyes come before them and behind them symbolizes the power of all creation in celestial paradise to see both the past and the future. Now, when we get to Revelation 4:8, we'll also see that the 4 beasts have these 6 wings about them, and they are full of eyes, which many interpret to be eyes on the wings themselves, and full of eyes within, as used in that verse, presents an interesting statement, because now we have to kind of look inside the beast kind of reminds me, the thing that I think about, you're going to think I'm crazier. But when I think about this, I think of Star Wars. It's the Empire Strikes Back, right? And you've got the rebels who have their base on the ice planet of Hoth. And Luke is getting out. He's out after dark. And so Han Solo goes out looking for Luke because if you stay out after dark, of course, you're going to freeze to death. And so in order for Han, who eventually finds Luke, to save the life of Luke, he cuts open his tauntaun, the beast that he was riding on. And you remember Han as he's cutting open the beast and his innards are kind of flowing out. He says, "Wow, I thought you guys smelled bad on the outside." And he's going to put Luke on the inside of the beast to help keep him warm. But imagine this. You got Han Solo who cuts open the tauntaun, and the only thing that comes out are a bunch of eyeballs, right? And that's what I think about when I think of Revelation 4:8, is these four beasts that have these six wings, and they were full of eyes within. I mean, that's the quote from the verse. What can I say? I mean, I've got this crazy imagination or something, but you'll never read that verse again the same way, right? Whenever now you think about reading that verse and you see it full of eyes within, you're going to think of Han Solo cutting open a tauntaun, a bunch of eyeballs rolling out. So what is the meaning of this, though? I mean, the bottom line is it's a very weird symbol to see a bunch of an image of a beast who is full of eyes within, and so they must have some specific meaning, and so for these inward eyes. And so consider this, a couple of things, and I will get to the point here and tell you what I think the meaning of it is, but these verses help kind of explain it, and we'll illustrate it. First, if we go to Doctrine and Covenants, section 76, verse 94, it says, quote, "They who dwell in his presence," meaning the presence of God, "are the church of the firstborn, and they shall see as they are seen, and know as they are known, having received of his fullness and of his grace." Close quote. Now, the reason I quote this verse is for the language that talks about they are seen as they are seen. And this has to do with who we are. What is our divine purpose? There is a divinity within us. And so when a person has these inward eyes that can see within, I tend to think that these eyes represented as on these beasts have the ability to see within themselves and see the divine within themselves, as Joseph Smith saw in the 76th section when he says that people, when they get to paradise, people when they get to the celestial kingdom, they will see as they are seen. In other words, they will be seen for their divine potential and who they are divinely speaking, not as these mortal beings with all our weaknesses and problems that we have to get today, but essentially in paradise you can see the divinity within that we have always possessed, but then we will then realize it because we have these eyes that see within, and we see as we are seen by God the Father. He sees us for truly who we really are. Looking at Doctrine and Covenants, section 130, verse 7, it says, quote, "But they reside in the presence of God on a globe like a sea of glass and fire, where all things for their glory are manifest, past, present, and future, and are continually before the Lord." Close quote. I see this as another expression, if you look kind of on a microscopic level as opposed to a macroscopic level, but you looking at us individuals, then we have essentially this idea that the Lord can see us for who we are, and he can look within us, and that's this concept of these eyes within. It includes the glory that people can see in themselves once they get to celestial paradise. And if you go to Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verses 67, it says, quote, "And if your eye be single to my glory, your whole body shall be filled with light, and there shall be no darkness in you. And that body which is filled with light comprehendeth all things." Close quote. So as we see here, a body has light within it, which corresponds to the concept of eyes within, which, because the eye, of course, is a reflection of light and glory, knowledge and intelligence. And so essentially, keep in mind that we're talking here about the spirits in celestial paradise, whereas spirits who are in prison in the postmortal spirit world do not possess any more light or knowledge than they did at the time of their death. This is confirmed in Alma 34:34, which says, quote, "You cannot say when you are brought to that awful crisis that I will repent, that I will return to my God. Nay, ye cannot say this. For that same spirit which doth possess your bodies at the time that ye go out of this life, that same spirit will have power to possess your body in that eternal world." Close quote. So if you had someone who was living a very wicked life and they possess no light, you don't automatically get light. You don't have your the veil of forgetfulness that is taken away from you, and you're going to continue to have to go through the process of repenting and overcoming these things while in spirit prison. And so Robert Millett said it this way, quote, "There are those who suppose that death brings with it a restoration of pre-earth knowledge. The scriptures do not sustain such an idea. Were this the case, those in the spirit world who had not heard the gospel could hardly be judged according to men in the flesh, as a revelation ancient and modern asserts." And then he quotes, of course, 1 Peter 4:6 in the 138th section of the Doctrine and Covenants. Close quote. Now, essentially what we learn from these things is that light and the influence of the Holy Ghost varies depending in the postmortal spirit world where you're at. And even within the spirit prison, that light, knowledge, and intelligence varies depending upon the degree of wickedness of people that there exists. We're told in section 138 of the Doctrine and Covenants, verse 30, quote, "But behold, from among the righteous, he," meaning Christ, "organized his forces and appointed messengers, clothed with power and authority, and commissioned them to go forth and carry the light of the gospel to them that were in darkness." Close quote. Parley P. Pratt said it this way. He said, quote, "I will suppose in the spirit world a grade of spirits of the lowest order, composed of murderers, robbers, thieves, adulterers, drunkards, and persons ignorant, uncultivated, etc., who are in prison or in hell, without hope, without God, and unworthy as yet of gospel instruction. Take another class of spirits, pious, well-disposed men, for instance, the honest Quaker, Presbyterian, or other sectarian, who, although honest and well-disposed, had not, while in the flesh, the privilege of the priesthood and gospel." Close quote. So again, we see these classes, and essentially Alvin R. Dyer described them as all varieties and grades of intellectual being, and also graded conditions of righteousness and unrighteousness. He said the spirit world will contain the same cross-section of diversity of race and creed that exists upon the earth. And so when the spirit basically comes into the postmortal spirit world, he does so with the same religious concept or the lack of it. And in spirit prison, that can be all gradations. In the paradise, on the other hand, where essentially you are added upon at that point with all this light and knowledge, these eyes before and behind and within, we see ourselves for who we are, and everything is then open to us. And the reason for the difference, of course, is the probationary period will be over in the postmortal spirit celestial kingdom. And so that's not the case in prison, of course. And so that gives us a good idea of what some of these images mean. Now, let's move on to Revelation 4:7 that says, quote, "And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf, and the third beast had a face as a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle." Close quote. So this is where we get into these four classes of things represented by these four living creatures. And we have the lion, the calf, the man, and the flying eagle. And so since we know that the four beasts are literal creatures in paradise, they also have this highly figurative and symbolic description of their images with eyes in front, back, and within. This corresponds in similar ways to the four cherubim that Ezekiel saw in his chapter 1 that also described his 4 cherubim with the face of a lion, calf, man, and eagle. Now, although there are these 4 symbols represented here, there are very differing interpretations on what these 4 classes or these 4 divisions mean. For example, some say that they represent the 4 divisions within the 12 tribes of Israel, with Judah being the lion, that's the emblem of the tribe of Judah. Ephraim would then be the calf, and the ox is the emblem of the tribe of Ephraim. And then it kind of breaks down a little bit, because they said that Reuben would then be the man and Dan would be the eagle, which I don't know exactly how we get a connection there. But if you're going to say that the 4 divisions represent divisions within the 12 tribes of Israel, you have to come up with something. Others say that the 4 represent the 4 evangelists from the New Testament, meaning Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Some say that they represent 4 dispensations of time. They'd say that the lion represented the patriarchal era, the ox the Mosaic era, man representing the Christian era, and the eagle representing the millennial era, which I find, that's pretty cool. Not correct, but interesting. Others say that the 4 represent the 4 attributes of God's heavenly government, or the 4-fold description of Jesus Christ. Very frequently, the 4 are described as the classes of man, animals, fowls, or the various classes of primacy. So in this kind of a representation, which is getting very close to what we're talking about here, you have man representing mankind, you have the eagle representing birds, you have the ox representing cattle or the tame animals, and you have the lion representing untamed animals. Well, what happens to the rest of creation? Because here we only have, you have mankind, you have animals who are tame, animals who are wild, birds. We got plants, we have worlds, and other things like this that still are not covered by this. So essentially, if you go to Doctrine and Covenants section 77 verse 3, we're told that it represents classes of all beings in their destined order and sphere of creation, the enjoyment of their eternal felicity. So it is essentially all of creation redeemed by Jesus Christ, which must include the 4 classes of humans, animals, plants, and then what would be the 4th? Well, Joseph Fielding Smith explained, quote, "Since the Lord has never created anything to be destroyed, every earth, whether created for celestial glory or for terrestrial or telestial, will have to pass through the condition of death and the resurrection, just the same as our earth will have to do. The passing away therefore means that after they have finished their probationary state in mortality, they will die and be raised again to receive the glory for which they were designed, to become the eternal abodes of man." Close quote. So that answers the question. If you have humans, animals, and plants, the 4th class of creation would then be these worlds that Joseph Fielding Smith is describing in the quote that I just read to you. We also have Brigham Young making this comment. He said, quote, "Our bodies are organized from the eternity of matter, from such matter as we breathe, and from such matter as is found in the vegetable and mineral kingdoms. This matter is organized into a world with all its appendages. All this vast creation was produced from element in its unorganized state, the mountain, rivers, seas, valleys, plains, and the animals, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms beneath and around us." Close quote. So Adam Clarke also kind of talked about this concept of how the creatures represent all of creation when he said, quote, "These creatures may be considered the representatives of the whole of creation," close quote. Now, Adam Clarke, of course, is not LDS. He was a theologian that wrote a commentary, a very extensive commentary on the Bible, and he concluded that the creatures consist of representations of the whole of creation, which of course is going to be the humans, animals, plants, and worlds, or what Brigham Young referred to as the mineral kingdom. Now, Joseph Fielding Smith also said, quote, "The light of Christ is the life-giving or quickening power of all things, worlds, the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and man. And so he is specifically describing these four classes or kingdoms of creation that all have the light of Christ. They're all alive. We don't think of the earth as something that is alive, but it is a living being. Now, another individual who is not an LDS guy but wrote a commentary on the Bible in 1990 is Daniel Whedon, and he said this about these creatures, quote, "These living beings represent not merely the animal kingdom, but also the very structure of the earth and all things known under the physical philosophy. This is shown by their number 4, which refers to the cardinal points, and so to the physical system. The whole mundane system is, as Hengstenberg terms it, inspirated. The Spirit of God is the soul of nature," close quote. So again, all of these tend to confirm that the 4 creatures, or the 4 beasts as we refer to them, represent all of creation in their 4 classes, from mankind down to the animals, to the plants, and to the earth and world itself. And so where do we get this idea where so many other authors kind of come up with the concept that it consists of, okay, you got the mankind, you've got the tame animals, you've got the wild animals, you have the birds. And the reason where that comes from is actually based on a spiritual or a scriptural tradition that comes from the days of Noah, when the whole of creation was essentially divided by 4 classes among the man, the cattle, the beasts, or the untamed, and then the birds. And so that's really where a lot of this is kind of coming from. And there is, to a certain extent, an allusion to that, but it's leaving out the mineral kingdom. And so you say, well, why did he use these 4, the man, the lion, and the flying eagle, and then the ox to represent? How come the mineral kingdom isn't represented by something else? And I sit there and I say, well, can you think of something better? How do you represent as a living being the earth in the context of these 4 living creatures who represent these classes of creation, right? And it just, you just do the best you can. It's apocalyptic in its nature. Okay, let's go on and talk about Revelation 4:8 in part. I'm just going to talk about the first part of this verse, and some of it we've kind of covered a little bit already, but it says, quote, "And the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within," close quote. So I've already talked about the concept of the eyes within, but here we want to talk a little bit about these 6 wings that each of the 4 beasts have, totaling how many wings? 24. Oh, and there were 24 elders. So all of these things kind of, these images and these meanings all kind of start to tie together. They resemble the 6 wings on the 4 seraphim or angels from Isaiah's vision of Christ in the heavenly temple. And in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, it says, quote, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings, and twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly," close quote. Now, one thing to mention about this has the word seraphims, plural. That's really not an appropriate translation. Seraphim should be not without, it shouldn't have the S on the end. Seraphim is plural. The IM on the end makes it plural. So it's like a plural if you add the S. So this is a little tidbit of information. But in any case, we're talking here about the 6 wings with twain, twain and twain. It almost sounds like a country music song that has lots of twang in it. But these are twain, meaning with 2 wings, he covers his face, which essentially is a symbol of showing humility and reverence. And then with 2 feet, he covered his feet, which would be to express respect. And then with the 3rd pair of wings, representing the power of these beasts to move and to act, and basically the power to carry out the works of God. So John's vision has also these 4 beasts that have 6 wings on each of them. So there are some very serious similarities and symbolism that probably exist, but there are some notable differences as well. For example, the four-piece in John's vision had these eyes that were before, behind, and on the wings that were also full of eyes. And so notice how essentially in John's vision, the wings don't cover up the ability of the four beasts to actually see. They can see behind them, in front of them, inside of them. Nothing about the wings is obstructing their image, whereas in Isaiah's vision, you got the wings that cover the eyes. And so there are some differences in them. But this gives us a good idea of where kind of the imagery comes from. And as I've already explained, the meaning of the eyes round and about, within and all sides, we don't need to cover that again. Next time we're going to continue with our discussion of Revelation 4:8, where we're going to see the worship of these four beasts and the 24 elders in verses 8 through 10 of Revelation 4, and we'll do that in my next podcast. And so I'll see you then. Thanks for listening, subscribing, watching, listening, sharing, whatever it is that you're doing. Thanks a lot for being with me. Thanks to Jenna for all the technical stuff, and I'll see you next time.